On the morning of the 3rd of March 1943, the Bismarck Sea looked like a stage set for fate. According to the Combined Fleet Operational Diary, Admiral Masatomi Kimura's convoy, consisting of 8 transport ships and 4 escort destroyers, departed from Rabaul carrying 6,900 troops of the 51st Division, along with ammunition, fuel, and heavy equipment for the Leh front. They believed these waters were already under Japanese control, but at 9, as the first waves splashed against the deck of the Shirayuki, a weapon they had never encountered in any Imperial Navy manual appeared on the horizon. According to the 5th Air Force Combat Report, only 15 minutes later, the entire Japanese formation had vanished from the surface, leaving behind black columns of smoke rising 3,000 feet and explosions echoing for miles. The numbers in the report sent to Washington were chillingly unreal. 12 out of 12 ships destroyed, including 8 transports completely sunk. Over 5,700 dead, fewer than 1,200 survivors, most rescued by submarines after nightfall. It took only 15 minutes to erase a division, wrote Lieutenant Colonel Edward Liner, lead pilot of the B-25 squadron, in his diary. In the air, the smell of smoke, oil, and blood blended. Beneath the sea, Japan's giant ships had become twisted carcasses of steel, hulls split in two, decks burning like massive torches. A surviving Japanese soldier recalled in his post-war memoir, "The water was red like hot steel. I heard the screams of the dying mixed with the sound of gunfire." According to the United States Army Air Forces Board Technical Report, the cause of the disaster did not lie in artillery or torpedoes. Still, in a type of aircraft Japan had never imagined could exist, the B-25 Mitchell Strafer, a low-altitude attack variant equipped with 8 machine guns of 0.5-inch caliber in its nose. Each gun weighed 64 pounds and fired 850 rounds per minute, creating a wall of fire of more than 6,800 bullets per minute, ripping into ship hulls. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary rounds, with a 619-grain burning core and a muzzle velocity of 2,910 feet per second, pierced the thin steel decks, hit the fuel and ammunition holds, and detonated the entire internal structure. When the pilot pulled the trigger, the whole aircraft shook as if being drawn into its own stream of fire. A pilot from the 90th Squadron described it. "The whole nose turned white, like a welding torch cutting through steel." According to the 5th Air Force Training Bulletin, the technique used in the battle was called skip bombing, a new tactic that allowed bombs to bounce on the water's surface like skipping stones. Dropped from an altitude of 200–250 feet, and a distance of 340 yards, 500-pound bombs were fitted with 5-second delayed fuses, skipping once or twice before piercing the ship's hull and exploding at the waterline. The strike was not only precise but absolutely devastating. Reports noted that these bombs often split the ships in half, throwing up water columns like walls. When machine gun fire and bombs worked together within a few hundred meters, the effect resembled a metal cutting saw slicing through armor. On the surface, the Japanese convoy had almost no time to react. The 25mm guns could not lower their barrels enough to fire at sea level. The 5-inch cannons exploded harmlessly in the air, while the B-25 seconds flew at only 60 feet altitude. By the time the gunners realized what was happening, the planes had already roared past the ship's side, leaving behind hundreds of bullet holes and bodies strewn across the deck. An Australian observer watching from afar wrote, "The sea turned black with oil and red with men." When the last B-25 seconds departed, only smoke, water, and glowing shards of metal sinking slowly remained. According to the Combined Fleet Archives, news of the catastrophe reached the Japanese Naval General Staff on the afternoon of the 5th of March 1943. The report, 4 pages long, was concise and cold. Entire Leh convoy destroyed. Losses total, cause, low-altitude strafing and skip bombing. Soon after, Japan issued an order banning daytime convoys throughout the entire Southwest Pacific, forcing all transport to operate only at night or by submarine. Supply speed dropped to 20% of pre-battle levels. Bases at Leh, Salamaua, and Buna began to suffer shortages of ammunition and food. isolating tens of thousands of soldiers. After the Bismarck Sea, our convoys moved like ghosts, a Japanese officer recalled in a 1961 interview. We sailed without lights, without hope. In Washington, the victory report was read in silence. According to the Office of Air Force History, this was the first time the United States had proven that a tactical air unit could destroy a naval convoy in a single engagement. The Office of Strategic Analysis called it the end of surface logistics for Japan. The generals at the Pentagon concluded, sea control no longer belongs to ships. In that moment, all previous naval doctrines became obsolete. Years later, on the seabed where the battle had taken place, Australian explorers still found the wrecks of the Oigawa Maru and Arashio lying parallel beneath the sand, their hulls broken in two, their cargo holds still embedded with 0.5-inch bullet fragments in the steel. A salvage engineer recalled, "The holes looked like someone had drilled through armor with fire." Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the surviving telegrams from the 1,943 General Staff archives bore only 4 words. Operation failed. Irreversible. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was not merely a victory, it marked the beginning of a new era of mechanized warfare. In 15 minutes, the entire might of Japan's traditional navy was shattered by the fusion of speed, innovation, and empirical data. And in that silence, as one pilot of the 5th Air Force said, the old world of naval war died. At the end of 1942, inside a makeshift hangar at Eagle Farm, Brisbane, the air was thick with oil and sweat. This was where a small revolution began, without blueprints, without budget, guided only by the intuition of a few mechanics and one man with scarred hands, Major Pappy Gunn. He had once been a Navy pilot, later a civilian flyer for Philippine Airlines, before the war turned him into a field engineer for the US Air Force. "I don't fix planes to fly, I fix them to fight," he often said as he welded steel plates onto the body of a B-25. Beside him was Jack Fox, a representative from North American aviation, who brought the original design but was ready to discard every technical convention. They saw in the B-25 Mitchell not merely a medium bomber, but the skeleton of a new weapon. According to the North American Field Log, 1942, Gunn's first idea was to completely remove the bomb bay to make room for forward firepower. "We don't need a bomber, we need a brawler," he wrote in his personal notebook. They dismantled the Norden sighting system, cut away the glass nose, and replaced it with a perforated steel plate and a row of 0.5-inch Browning machine guns. Initially, there were only 4 guns mounted directly into the front frame, but the recoil shook the entire airframe. After repeated reinforcements to the nose beams, they increased the number to 8 guns, arranged symmetrically, each set connected to an ammunition bay of 400 rounds per gun. Each burst lasted 8 seconds, producing 6,800 rounds per minute, enough to turn a ship's deck into molten steel. The prototype was jokingly nicknamed Pappy's Folly by the mechanics. According to the 5th Air Force Engineering Report, December 1942, during the first test at Archerfield Airfield, Queensland, the aircraft pierced a 1-inch thick steel plate placed 300 yards away in just 6 seconds. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary rounds burst like fireworks, igniting the mock battleship hull. The report stated, "Penetration efficiency was 5 times that of 20mm cannons, and accuracy increased by 40%. When Pappy stepped down from the cockpit, he said only one sentence, 'Now it's a ship killer.'" According to the United States Army Air Force's Material Command Memo, January 1943, General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, received word of the test from his subordinates. He arrived in Brisbane the very next day. When he saw Pappy Gunn sitting on the unpainted frame of a B-25, hammer and ammo box in hand, Kenney asked, "Can it fly straight?" Gunn replied, "Straight enough to kill." After a 10-minute conversation, Kenney ordered the project officially sanctioned, even though Washington had not approved. Just 2 weeks later, the B-25 seconds of the 90th Bomb Squadron were converted to the Strafer configuration, permanently changing how the US Air Force fought ships. The 5th Air Force conversion program, February 1943, recorded every technical step in meticulous detail. First, the nose was reinforced with a 0.25-inch thick aluminum frame welded directly into the longitudinal beams to withstand recoil. Next came the installation of a dual-layer ammunition feed system, 200 rounds per layer. The electric firing system was controlled by buttons on the control yoke, allowing the pilot to fire all guns simultaneously or in pairs. The auxiliary fuel tank was relocated aft to make room for an ammunition bay of 3,200 rounds. The entire process took 78 man-hours and was carried out entirely by hand, without official blueprints. In February 1943, according to the operational diary of the 3rd Attack Group, the first B-25 Strafers were tested in combat conditions. Pilots of the 90th Bomb Squadron described the feeling when firing as like riding an earthquake. The plane shook, the cockpit glass blurred with smoke, and the ground ahead lit up. A young pilot named John Hennebury wrote in a letter to his family, "When the guns start, it feels like the plane is sawing the air apart." That was literally true, as each burst produced nearly 2,000 pounds of recoil force, causing the nose to dip a few degrees. This forced pilots to hold the controls with their full arm strength, but in return, they wielded unmatched firepower. As news of the aircraft spread to nearby bases, many engineers called it a miracle of mechanics. According to the Australian Air Board liaison note, March 1943, Australian engineers at Eagle Farm helped produce 12 additional nose gun kits, speeding up the conversion process. Each kit included a mounting rack, feed tube, and hand-cut steel ammo box, marked GF-25, short for Gunfox 25 caliber system. By the end of February, the entire 3rd Attack Group fleet had been converted to the Strafer configuration, ready for its first trial by fire, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Technically, the B-25 Strafer became the perfect embodiment of what the military would later call innovation under fire. Instead of relying on US-based production lines, they turned a field workshop in Australia into a live experimental lab. Every improvement was measured by survival time and the number of shipwrecks on radar, not by technical drawings. In his diary, Pappy Gunn wrote, "If the machine works, that's approval enough." This quote was later cited in the History of the 5th Air Force as a symbol of spontaneous creativity. In March 1943, when the B-25 Strafer officially entered service, the U.S. Air Force stepped into a new era. According to the USAAF Equipment Status Report, it was the first low-level attack gunship in military aviation history. In the humid air of Queensland, the sounds of drilling, welding, and laughter of wartime mechanics filled the nights. Amid the smell of oil and steel, they did not yet know that these patched-together aircraft would change the entire Japanese naval strategy in less than 3 months. And when the B-25 pilots took off from Port Moresby that morning, history was ready to turn. Before 1943, the battlefield of New Guinea was a swampy maze of jungle and mud, a place American pilots bitterly called the Impossible Front. According to the 5th Air Force Operational Summary, the hit rate of high-altitude bombing missions was only 1.7%. Over 18 months, hundreds of B-17 and B-26 sorties took off from Port Moresby, but bombs fell miles off target, missing moving objectives entirely. Japanese convoys traveling from Rabaul to Leh continued to arrive regularly, while American pilots returned exhausted. An officer from the 43rd Bomb Group wrote in his diary, "We flew 6 hours for nothing but empty sea." According to the Army Air Force's Pacific Theater Review, 1942, the cause lay not in skill but in technical limitation. The B-17 Flying Fortress had been designed for stationary targets, not for small ships moving at 10-12 knots. Surface radar was still rare, and navigation relied solely on eyesight and experience. Torpedoes were the Navy's privilege, while the Army Air Forces had no access to them. "We were fighting ships with ghosts," Lieutenant Robert Miller wrote in a report sent to Brisbane. For them, naval warfare felt like striking at empty air a hunt without a real prey. The 500-pound bombs often fell behind the ships, sending up 200-foot water columns that caused no damage. According to the Southwest Pacific Combat Analysis, it took an average of 50 bombs to hit a single moving target. As aircraft withdrew, 25mm anti-aircraft guns from the ground fired reflexively upward and sometimes hit more effectively than the American bombs themselves. Each time they returned, pilots looked up at maps dotted with red marks symbolizing untouched targets, and those marks never decreased. It was a war of attrition against frustration, one officer said in a post-Buna campaign briefing. The situation had grown so dire that General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, admitted that the Pacific Air War was turning into a war of wasted gasoline. According to the headquarters briefing notes, November 1942, there were days when 70% of the aircraft returned without ever seeing the enemy. The losses in morale and manpower were immeasurable. A young pilot named Harold Clark later recalled in his memoir, "We bombed clouds. We fought distance, not the enemy." While ground forces still waited for air power to open the way over the skies of New Guinea, the Americans were reaching a dead end. The change came from one quiet, methodical man, Major William Benn of the 43rd Bomb Group. According to the mission debrief 43rd BG, December 1942, Benn realized that to sink a ship, altitude was not the key, impact angle was. He recalled how children skipped stones across a pond, and from that came the idea of skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from 5,000 feet, Benn lowered his aircraft to 250 feet at 230 miles per hour, releasing bombs so they would bounce once or twice across the water's surface before striking the ship's hull. When fitted with 4-5-second delayed fuses, the bombs would pierce the steel plating and detonate inside. "If the bomb bounces, it kills," Benn wrote in his first test report at Port Moresby. This bold idea was initially dismissed as reckless. Flying at 200 feet meant that even a 13mm bullet could wipe out an entire crew, but Benn believed precision would outweigh the risk. According to the 5th Air Force test flight log, January 1943, he personally piloted a modified B-25D, conducting 15 test drops on the wreck of the SS Pruth, a grounded ship off Moresby. After each run, engineers measured the angle of bounce, detonation range, and approach speed. The result, 12 out of 15 bombs struck within 10 feet of the target, a success rate previously unheard of. When General Kenney viewed the test footage, he fell silent. The bombs skipped across the sea, leaving white trails before slamming into the ship's side, turning it into a smoking heap of metal. "This is the future," he told his officers. Benn was authorized to train all pilots of the 43rd and 90th Bomb Groups for 2 weeks before applying the tactic in combat. The Port Moresby base became an experimental training ground. Each pilot practiced dropping bombs from 60 feet at a distance of 340 yards with a maximum deviation angle of 5 degrees to avoid water reflection. The data were recorded manually, as carefully as mathematical formulas. According to the Southwest Pacific Training Report, February 1943, the pilots called it the art of hitting the impossible. They trained through the night, using rusted steel ships as targets, painting white lines across the sea for range calibration. One lieutenant recalled, "We flew so low that the propeller cut the spray. Their senses for speed, sound, and distance were trained to pure instinct. Every pull-up sent seawater splashing against the cockpit glass, engines roaring, and everyone knew that a tiny miscalculation could turn the crew into fragments." According to the Air Tactics Development Memo, March 1943, by the end of February, the entire 43rd Bomb Group had mastered skip bombing. For the final test, Benn ordered an attack on a mock convoy 20 nautical miles offshore. Within 9 minutes, 6 out of 8 ships were directly hit. The report noted, the sea looked like it was boiling. That was when the pilots understood they held in their hands a weapon that could change the entire course of naval warfare. When Major Gunn's B-25 Strafers completed their conversions at Eagle Farm, 2 streams of innovation, technical and tactical, finally converged. One provided firepower, the other precision. And only a few weeks later, on a morning over the Bismarck Sea, They fused into what historians would call the deadliest 15 minutes of the Pacific War. On the waters between Rabaul and Lae, on the morning of the 1st of March 1943, the escort convoy of the Imperial Japanese Navy quietly left port. According to the Combined Fleet Operations Record, the formation, commanded by Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, consisted of 8 destroyers and 8 transport ships, carrying 6,900 troops along with armoured vehicles, field artillery, and thousands of tons of supplies for the 51st Division. It was considered a dangerous but feasible mission because for an entire year prior, not a single Japanese convoy had been sunk along this route. Kimura placed his faith in the Navy's doctrine. Concentrated firepower, disciplined gunnery, and steady formation speed would be enough to bring the convoy safely to Lae. According to the Imperial Navy Doctrine Manual 1942, Japanese convoys followed a defensive model known as the umbrella of steel. Each destroyer was equipped with 127mm, 5-inch guns, along with dozens of 25mm, Type 96 cannons, forming a dense wall of fire around the transports. Large transports such as the Kembu Maru and Oigawa Maru were also fitted with 13mm machine guns on the forward and aft decks. In theory, any aircraft entering this zone would face an impenetrable barrage. "Our gunners are our armour," one internal report stated. That belief was reinforced by their experience at the Java Sea, where concentrated fire had once sunk 3 Allied warships in half an hour. In the minds of Japanese officers, naval warfare was still a contest of ships and guns. According to the Naval Staff Briefing, January 1943, they viewed aerial combat as a secondary element of naval war, a duel between high-altitude bombers and anti-aircraft fire. The ideal enemy attack, they believed, would come from above, visible, measurable, and predictable. Anything flying below 1,000 feet was deemed suicidal. Within that mindset, the concept of medium bombers diving to strike from sea level simply did not exist in their tactical literature. The sailors aboard that convoy carried with them a confidence nurtured by early war victories. They had seen their fleet sweep the British from the East Indies and crush the US Navy in the Philippines. "The Pacific was our home water," a former gunner recalled in a 1968 interview. On the deck of the destroyer Arashio, anti-aircraft crews cleaned their gun barrels, chatting about reaching Lae in 2 days and returning to Rabaul for the next run. Many carried family photos, believing this voyage to be as safe as all the others. They did not know that the sky was changing and that their confidence itself was the fatal flaw. According to the 11th Air Fleet deployment chart, the convoy planned to move in a U-shaped formation, with destroyers Shirayuki, Arashio, Asagumo, and Tokitsukaze guarding the outer ring. The transports were arranged in 2 parallel lines, spaced 600 yards apart, advancing at 8 knots. On paper, it was the ideal formation against submarines, but extremely vulnerable to low-level air attacks. In the diary of Lieutenant Yasumi Doi, gunnery officer aboard Tokitsukaze, he wrote, "The formation looks perfect on the chart, but from the bridge it feels like a slow parade. From above, the entire convoy appeared as a string of connected targets stretched across the sea." Kimura's faith in the umbrella of steel came from experience. According to the Rabaul Convoy Action Summary 1942 over the previous year, more than 30 bombing sorties by B-17 seconds had attacked Japanese convoys in the area without a single confirmed hit. The bombs fell hundreds of meters away, sending water plumes skyward before crashing back down like rain. The Japanese concluded that American bombers could not hit moving targets, and if they did, the convoy's speed would make the bombs slip past. This conclusion led them to ignore the development of low-altitude radar or surface warning systems technologies the British and Americans were already deploying. On the night of March 2, as the convoy passed Cape Dampier, the sea was calm, the sky clear, and the southeast wind steady. The gunners aboard Shirayuki still laughed and talked. Many believed the next bombing run would miss, as always. "The Americans always fly too high," Lieutenant Doi noted. They turned on floodlights to inspect their guns, adjusted formation, completely unaware that to the south, at Port Moresby, American pilots were preparing for the first combat test of skip bombing. Kimura's fatal error lay not in courage, but in definition, his definition of war. While Pappy Gunn and William Benn were testing how to make bombs skip across the sea, the Imperial Navy's doctrine remained bound to confrontation. They had never considered an attack that combined forward cannon fire with bouncing bombs, a tactic that would turn the low-altitude sky into a steel inferno. According to the Post-War Naval Tactical Analysis 1946, it was this gap in perception that led Kimura's convoy to enter the Bismarck Sea like a parade, fully exposed to what they had never imagined. From his command post aboard Shirayuki, Kimura looked through his binoculars, watching smoke drift from the lead escort and thinking of Leh, where he would deliver 6,900 soldiers and declare the mission complete. The sea was calm, the wind carried the smell of burning fuel, and light shimmered on the waves like shards of glass. He did not know that beyond the horizon, 24 B-25 seconds and Beaufighters were taking off from Moresby, flying lower than his own masts. In that silence, the faith of an entire doctrine waited to collapse. At dawn on the 3rd of March 1943, the surface of the Bismarck Sea lay under a thin veil of mist. According to the 5th Air Force Combat Report, at 6, radar at the Dobodura base detected an unusual signal moving northeast at a steady speed of 8 knots, a formation of 16 ships, matching reconnaissance reports of Admiral Masatomi Kimura's transport convoy. The information was immediately relayed to the Port Moresby Command Centre. 3 hours later, at 9, the southern sky suddenly thundered as 12 B-25 Strafers of the 3rd Attack Group and 13 Beaufighters of the RAAF emerged from low clouds. At sea, the Japanese ships continued in double-column formation, bows pointed toward Leh, completely unaware they were already within range of their hunters. According to the plan approved by General George Kenney, the attack would unfold in 2 layers. In the upper layer, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators would simulate a traditional high-altitude bombing run at 7,000 feet, forcing Japanese anti-aircraft guns to aim skyward. In the lower layer, B-25 seconds and Beaufighters would charge in at 1,000 feet, moving across the sea at 280 miles per hour like blades slicing water. Each pilot was ordered to approach at 1,200 yards, fire all 8 guns of 0.50-inch caliber for 8 seconds, equivalent to 900 rounds, then drop 2 500-pound bombs fitted with 5-second delayed fuses using the skip bombing technique. According to the RAAF No. 30 squadron log, the Australian Beaufighters opened the attack with sweeping strafes, shredding decks and gun mounts to silence the enemy's anti-aircraft defences. When the Japanese convoy reacted, the sky was already ablaze. Thousands of rounds drew red streaks across the sea. Next came the B-25 Strafers, led by Major Edward Liner, his lead aircraft nicknamed Ruthless. Liner descended to 60 feet, flying parallel to the water's surface. When I pulled the trigger, the nose lit up like hell itself, he recalled in a 1955 interview. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the steel deck of the Shirayuki, detonating in the midship ammunition hold. Seconds later, the ship broke in half, flames shooting 200 feet into the air, the Japanese naval log recorded tersely. Shirayuki sank immediately, hit from bow to bridge. Not far away, the destroyer Arashio attempted to turn and shield the convoy but was hit by fire from 3 B-25 seconds simultaneously. According to the 5th Air Force debrief, the 3rd of March 1943, more than 2,000 rounds 0.5-inch ammunition were unleashed in less than 2 minutes. The floating fortress became a burning mass of iron, lost steering control, and rammed directly into the transport Nojima Maru. The 2 ships locked together, secondary explosions spread to the fuel tanks, and a massive fireball rose, visible 30 miles from shore. An American pilot described it. The sea was burning like oil. On the western side of the formation, Lieutenant John Hennebrey led the 2nd Squadron targeting the transports Kembu Maru and Oigawa Maru. Hennebrey opened fire at 1,500 yards, his stream of bullets raking through the bridge, cargo holds and gun decks. When bombs were dropped, the two bounced off the surface and slammed into the starboard side of Oigawa Maru. The explosion tore the ship in half. According to the combined fleet damage report, 1,500 soldiers in the cargo hold perished, most trapped below deck. Seawater poured in so quickly that the ship sank in under 4 minutes. Above, the high-flying B-17 seconds continued dropping decoy bombs, forcing Japanese gunners to waste ammunition shooting into the sky. "It was chaos," wrote Lieutenant Yasumi Doi aboard the destroyer Tokitsukaze. The sky and the sea switched places. Everything was fire. The Beaufighters added 20mm strafing runs, sweeping along decks and tearing through anti-aircraft crews. Amid the confusion, several transports tried to change course but lost control when their rudders were destroyed. Many ships caught fire, ammunition holds exploded in chains, and bright bursts dotted the sea's surface. According to the RAAF combat report, March 1943, the entire battle lasted only 15 minutes. When the last B-25 pulled up from the water, only fire and thick smoke blanketed the horizon. The convoy of 8 transports and 4 destroyers had been wiped out. Some sank on the spot. Others capsized and vanished from radar within minutes. The sea was thick with oil and bodies. An RAAF pilot recalled, "When we turned back, the sea was just a sheet of flame. It didn't look like water anymore." Oh, by afternoon, Hudson reconnaissance planes flew over the area to confirm results. According to the 5th Air Force reconnaissance summary, no ships remained afloat, only wreckage and black smoke columns rising thousands of feet. That same day, General Kenney radioed Washington, "The convoy is gone. We have erased it." The Japanese received their final distress signals at 10:15, then silence. That night, several Japanese submarines reached the area, rescuing fewer than 1,200 men, most burned, exhausted, or drifting for miles. According to the post-war naval inquiry, 1,946, over 80% of the 51st Division's reinforcements were lost, along with all ammunition, food, and heavy equipment. The Japanese report read, "The sea swallowed an entire division." On the deck of his B-25, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Liner wrote a short line in his journal, "We hit them like gods with machine guns." The young pilots sat silently in the cabin, staring down at the black water below. They had just witnessed the birth of a new form of warfare. And in the drone of engines, as the formation turned back toward Port Moresby, Japan's naval war had ended. And in that 15 minutes, Kenney said later at a press briefing, an empire on water ceased to exist. On the 6th of March 1943, only 3 days after the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, a brief telegram from Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto to the Naval General Staff was repeatedly cited in the archives. "Sea transport is impossible if the enemy controls the air." According to the Combined Fleet Archives, this was the first official acknowledgement of a logistical defeat, a single line that altered the entire chain of strategic decision-making. That sentence was not a tactical observation, but a life-changing directive, for when control of the skies fell into enemy hands, every supply line suddenly became as fragile as a vine that had been cut. The impact spread like a wave. Intelligence and transport logs that followed recorded a dramatic decline in supply capability. By mid-1944, according to the Imperial Navy shipping report, Japan had lost approximately 60% of its total merchant tonnage compared to pre-campaign levels. This number was not merely a statistic, but a chart of a front line slowly dying. The immediate result was that outposts such as Lae, Bougainville, and New Britain became gradually isolated. Supply demands outstripped the limits of airdrops, and island reserves dwindled so quickly that just a few weeks of shortage reduced an entire regiment's combat strength. Japanese forces were forced to accept fragmented, high-risk transport operations and to adjust every operational plan to a new rule. Night was salvation, day was death. Psychological warfare collapsed. Survivors, prisoners, and post-war observers recounted that the B-25 Strafer inflicted not only physical losses but enduring terror. They gave the aircraft a supernatural name, Hachime no Shinigami, the eight-eyed death god, describing the nose guns as 8 eyes that could see through steel and flesh alike. A lieutenant who survived the battle recounted during a historical seminar, his gaze frozen as he recalled the sound of gunfire. When the spoon touched the cold cream, he froze for a second. The taste of milk felt almost forbidden. That simple image was his way of describing how, after the battle, ordinary acts like eating, sleeping, or speaking carried the color of ghosts. At later veterans' reunions, when the hall lights dimmed and campaign maps were projected on the screen, many men silently held each other's shoulders. The only sound was the faint clicking of the film reel, like the breathing of memory itself. The fear effect changed behavior so profoundly that convoy commanders began to take actions both ruthless and logical, better to lose cargo than let it fall into enemy hands. Reports indicated that many ships, once detected, dumped their loads into the sea, destroyed equipment, or burned provisions before retreating under cover of darkness. Such acts increased material losses but reduced the risk of assets being captured. The sailor's psychology shifted from former confidence to a reflex of survival, a foundation that forced all future plans to calculate risk as the dominant variable. In official response, Japan quickly experimented with new technical and tactical measures. They invested in additional radar, upgraded light guns, added 13mm deck weapons, restructured convoy formations, and intensified low-altitude anti-aircraft training. The Tokyo Express operation was expanded, using fast destroyers at night to evade enemy air patrols. These measures yielded short-term reductions in individual losses, but in terms of total logistical volume and sustainability, they could not compensate for the collapse of traditional daylight sea transport. According to the Naval Logistics Assessment, 1943-1944, submarine and high-speed night operations could provide only a fraction of the former capacity of daytime convoys. More critically, the strategic breakdown lay not only in the loss of goods but in the erosion of planning capability. Commanders were forced to acknowledge the limits of their old doctrines and to discard the foundational assumption of a safe sea. Meetings at the Naval General Staff after the Bismarck battle were filled with replacement proposals, but most were temporary fixes. One internal report concluded that Japan required a complete restructuring of its naval logistics, something impossible to achieve quickly under limited resources and multi-front pressure. The strategic impact endured. Poor resupply left many island units unable to defend themselves, forcing withdrawals or gradual annihilation. This allowed the Allies to execute breakthrough operations that previously would have faced stronger resistance. The capture of Leh in September 1943 was a direct consequence. Japanese logistics had collapsed, leaving ground units stripped of the supplies needed to hold their positions. By mid-1944, the map of the South Pacific had changed shape, as outposts lost strategic relevance due to their inability to receive reinforcements or materiel. From an academic standpoint, post-war analyses concluded that the Battle of the Bismarck Sea demonstrated a fundamental principle: control of the air destroys logistics, and when logistics collapse, strategy enters systemic failure. An Allied analyst wrote after the war that this event proved the classic axiom: logistics, not valor, wins wars. For Japan, the lesson was paid for with tens of thousands of lives and years of desperate attempts to patch the wound, but it became deeply ingrained in the military doctrines of the following century. In a small meeting room in Tokyo years later, a former naval commander stood before a microphone. The room was dark, the projector light illuminating his pale face. He sighed, his hands trembling, and spoke a single sentence before retreating into silence. "We lost the sea as our supply route, and with it, we lost our reach." Those words captured a simple truth. The collapse of logistics was an open wound, one that bled and ached through the rest of the war. When the war ended in August 1945, the B-25 Strafers lay scattered across forward bases, bodies riddled with holes, wings chipped and bent, but within those metal frames was the beginning of a new philosophy of warfare. According to the USAAF Post-War Technical Review, the low-altitude attack aircraft model pioneered by Pappy Gunn and George Kenney was recorded as an innovation that changed the course of air warfare. From that point on, the B-25 Strafer became the template for an entire generation of high-firepower attack aircraft that followed. In the 1,960 seconds, as the U.S. Air Force entered the Vietnam War, the idea of a flying gunship was reborn in the form of the AC-47 Spooky, a modified Douglas C-47 equipped with rapid-firing Gatling guns. According to the USAF Air Systems Evaluation 1966, the principle of lateral ground strafing was taken directly from the 1943 Strafer training manuals. The lineage did not stop there. 10 years later, the Air Force introduced the AC-130 Spectre, armed with 105 mm, 40 mm, and 20 mm Vulcan cannons, turning the sky into a moving fortress. On the training charts, the note Origin, B-25 concept appeared in the document margins, and by the late 1970 seconds, that legacy was embodied in the A-10 Thunderbolt II, equipped with a GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon, a weapon with the firepower of a battle tank, yet employing the same low, precise, and resolute attack philosophy first forged by the B-25. According to the Air Doctrine Analysis 1978, the forward attack tactic exploiting surprise and delivering immediate destruction became the guiding principle of the U.S. Air Force. Every gunship prototype thereafter bore the imprint of the Strafer, from weapon placement and cockpit design to the philosophy of coordination with ground forces. An engineer from the A-10 program wrote in his memoir, "We didn't invent anything new, we just rediscovered guns logic." The spirit of field improvisation at Eagle Farm, where mechanics once welded steel through the night, had evolved into the industrialized creativity of a superpower. The final wartime variant of the B-25 series, the B-25 Jules II, represented the peak of that philosophy. According to the North American Aviation Production Record, this model was armed with 18 machine guns of 0.5-inch caliber, 8 inches the nose, 4 on the sides, 2 inches the upper turret, 2 waist-mounted, and 2 inches the tail. Its total firepower equaled that of a light destroyer. In tests conducted at Wright Field in 1945, the J-22 could fire 15,300 rounds per minute, the highest rate of fire density of any piston-engine aircraft of its era. It could cut a destroyer in half, the report noted. The combination of dense firepower and maneuverability made it a symbol of the concentrated forward fire philosophy, where strength was focused on a single point of attack to end a battle as quickly as possible. From this design came the formalization of the forward firing philosophy. According to the USAF Tactical Training Doctrine 1952, the Air Force codified the principle, fire where you fly, making the alignment of flight direction and attack vector the golden rule of low-altitude combat. That principle would later influence every design, from attack helicopters to strike aircraft. The B-25 Strafer, once an improvised product of a field workshop, had laid the foundation for the doctrine of low-altitude precision assault, the cornerstone of modern close-air support tactics. According to the USAF Historical Division, the concept of innovation under fire became the core spirit of Air Force training academies. Pilots were taught that weapons did not reside solely in design, but in the user's understanding of their limits. A gun or an aircraft had value only when transformed to adapt to circumstance. The slogan, "Adaptation is the real armor," first appeared in a 1956 training manual, later painted on the walls of Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. From the improvised battlefield of Brisbane, that experimental ethos had become a global military education standard. The legacy of the Strafer extended far beyond technology. It reshaped how humanity thought about war. In the post-war studies of tactical innovation, scholars identified the B-25 as a rare case where a technical modification transformed an entire combat doctrine. There was no committee approval, no War Department blueprint, yet it became the model for generations to come. It was innovation by necessity, the report stated, born in mud, proven in fire. From that moment, the USS Military came to believe that innovation could begin in the field, without orders from above, so long as effectiveness could be proven through data. In Japan, more than 3 decades later, military scholars began revisiting the Battle of the Bismarck Sea with a different tone. In a 1983 lecture at the National Defense University, Professor Masanori admitted, "The B-25 Strafer did not just destroy our fleet, it destroyed our entire concept of warfare." He described a classroom film screening showing the B-25 seconds skimming over the sea, muzzle flashes reflecting on students' faces. "What we lost," he said, "was not a fleet, but imagination." The quote was later reprinted in the Journal of Strategic Studies, Tokyo, as a symbol of intellectual transformation in military thought. From a mechanical modification in 1942, the world learned that adaptation is not a reaction, it is a survival instinct. The B-25 Strafer was not merely a machine of war, it was a reminder that every doctrine, no matter how entrenched, can be overturned by an idea born in the field. When the first A-10 cannons thundered over Iraq 4 decades later, the echo remained, adapt or become history. Thank you for following this journey, where numbers, people, and machines have told the story of an unforgettable era in the history of world aviation. We are committed to continuing to bring you the finest content, recreating the battles that have shaped the modern world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more battles.